In October of 2017, Saudi Arabia's crown prince stood on a stage in Riyadh and promised the impossible. A city with no cars, no streets, no carbon emissions. A mirrored structure 170 kilometers long, cutting straight through the desert, built to house 9 million people. 9 years later, Saudi Arabia is paying $16 billion, not to build that city, to cancel it. This is the story of how the most ambitious construction project in human history quietly became the most expensive retreat. Vision 2030 was supposed to be Saudi Arabia's exit ramp from oil. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman needed the kingdom to build an economy that didn't depend on what came out of the ground. NEOM was the flagship. $500 billion, funded through the Public Investment Fund, aimed at turning empty desert in Tabuk province into a hub for tourism, technology, and manufacturing. At the center of it sat The Line. Not a city in the traditional sense, a single structure, 500 meters tall, 200 meters wide, 170 kilometers long. Every basic service reachable within a 5-minute walk. Robots handling security and logistics, powered entirely by renewable energy. By July of 2022, 5 years after the announcement, 2 buildings existed. The rest was bare desert. Cost estimates didn't hold. What started at $500 billion for the line alone ballooned. By 2025, independent estimates place the full NEOM initiative's total cost above $8.8 trillion, more than 25 times Saudi Arabia's entire annual government budget. Then came the internal audit. The Wall Street Journal reported it found, in its own words, evidence of deliberate manipulation of NEOM's finances by certain members of management. NEOM's spokeswoman called the reporting a misrepresentation. But by 2025, new contracts had mostly stopped. And when Saudi Arabia released its pre-budget statement for 2026, NEOM wasn't mentioned at all. A leadership change followed. Ayman al-Mudaifer took over as chief executive and launched a strategic review. Layoffs, corporate restructuring, a full reassessment of what NEOM was even trying to be. Here's where the story turns from ambition to arithmetic. NEOM's budget for 2026 through 2030 includes 60 billion rials, $16 billion, set aside specifically to pay contractors to walk away. Not penalties in the way most people think of penalties. These are termination for convenience clauses, standard across Gulf construction contracts. When the employer halts a project early, the contractor gets made whole. Completed work, materials already ordered, equipment already mobilized, and the full cost of shutting down operations. Saudi Arabia retained the right to stop work at any time. It's exercising that right now. And it's expensive. Take Webuild, the Italian construction giant. 2 of its NEOM contracts alone, for dams and an architectural structure called the Bow at the Trojena site, carried a combined face value of $6.3 billion. South Korea's Hyundai Engineering and Construction had its contract for a 12.5-kilometer twin tunnel canceled. Malaysia's Eversendai lost its steel supply contract for Trojena. And the tunneling contract for the line's railroad was cut too. Trojena itself was set to host the 2029 Asian Winter Games. Saudi Arabia withdrew its bid. Confirmed cancellations so far add up to roughly $8.4 billion, about half of the total $16 billion termination budget. Which means a comparable volume of settlements is still being negotiated or hasn't been disclosed yet. And this is just NEOM. In Riyadh, construction on the Muqab, a cube-shaped skyscraper large enough to fit 20 Empire State Buildings inside it, was halted in January while financing and feasibility get reassessed. That project alone was estimated at $50 billion. So why walk away now after already spending $64 billion? Saudi Arabia's budget needs oil priced somewhere between $90 and $110 a barrel to balance. The kingdom is running a government deficit, tracking at roughly twice its official target. Aramco's quarterly dividend now exceeds what the company actually generates in cash. And the Public Investment Fund, the sovereign wealth fund bankrolling all of this, has liquid reserves of about $15 billion. A 6-year low, smaller than the termination bill it now has to cover. Picture it this way. The fund responsible for covering a $16 billion exit bill currently has $15 billion sitting in the bank. That's it. The bill is bigger than the checking account meant to pay it. Layer onto that the war with Iran, which has pushed defense spending sharply higher and made the security of Gulf infrastructure a live daily concern rather than a hypothetical one. The math simply stopped working. $16 billion to exit now was, in the kingdom's own calculation, cheaper than continuing to fund a $500 billion fantasy that had already ballooned past $8 trillion. But this is where it gets interesting. Saudi Arabia isn't retreating into austerity, it's redirecting. The line's original footprint is reportedly being rethought, not as a walkable utopia, but as an AI data center. The Sovereign Fund's financial review, which began back in 2024, concluded that computing infrastructure offers a far greater and faster financial return than a linear city nobody could finish. Money that isn't being burned on canceled tunnels and dams is flowing instead into artificial intelligence, logistics, and the infrastructure needed for two enormous fixed deadline commitments: Expo 2030 and the 2034 World Cup. Those dates don't move. NEOM's did repeatedly for 9 years. There is one place inside NEOM that's actually working: Oxagon, the industrial zone built around the old Duba port. Since the Iran war effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz to significant traffic, Oxagon has become an important logistics node for goods entering the Gulf. An $8.45 billion green hydrogen project there is nearing completion. It's not glamorous. It's not a mirrored skyscraper. But it's real, and it's shipping cargo today. Compare that to Dubai. Dubai never tried to build a $500 billion structure that defied physics and construction logistics simultaneously. Dubai built free zones, regulatory frameworks, golden visas, paperwork that made it trivially easy for capital, companies, and people to relocate there. The Burj Khalifa is a monument, but the real infrastructure of Dubai's rise was legal and financial, not architectural. And here's the uncomfortable part for Riyadh. Dubai got there with a fraction of the oil wealth. No Aramco, no trillion-dollar sovereign fund, just rules that were easy to understand and fast to act on. Saudi Arabia had more capital than any competitor on earth and spent 9 years and $64 billion finding out that capital alone doesn't build a functioning city. Dubai had less money and more patience for the boring stuff: contract law, free trade zones, banking licenses. And it worked before the line ever poured its first foundation. That's not a coincidence. It's a pattern. The Gulf states that are winning the 21st century aren't the ones building the tallest thing. They're the ones building the easiest place to do business. Saudi Arabia bet on concrete, physical, visible, photographable ambition, a bet that the sheer scale of construction would force the future into existence. Dubai bet on paperwork, boring, invisible, replicable systems that let capital move faster than anywhere else in the region. 9 years and $64 billion later, Saudi Arabia is paying $16 billion more just to stop pouring concrete. Dubai's paperwork bet cost a fraction of that, and it's still standing, still functioning, still attracting capital every single day. Concrete makes a better skyline. Paperwork makes a better balance sheet. In the end, the Gulf's biggest competitive advantage may not be the tallest skyscraper, but the easiest place to invest, build, and do business. NEOM isn't dead. Oxagon still ships cargo. The hydrogen plant still gets finished. But the line, the symbol that was supposed to prove Saudi Arabia could outbuild the rest of the world, that vision is over. What's left is a sovereign wealth fund with $15 billion in the bank, a $16 billion bill to close the books, and a much smaller, much more sober idea of what 2030 is actually going to look like. If you want to understand where Gulf capital goes next, it isn't into another line. It's into AI, into Expo 2030, into the World Cup, and into whatever comes after this generation of megaprojects finishes teaching the kingdom what $100 billion is what it actually costs to change your mind. So here's the question worth arguing about. Did Dubai actually outthink Saudi Arabia? Or did Dubai just get lucky, building its model before oil money made ambition this cheap to indulge? Put your answer in the comments.